Mr. Braden to see if he's coming. Haven't heard from him, so we're going to go ahead and get started because we do have a lot on our agenda. I want to start this evening with a presentation. There has been so much conversation, not just regionally but nationally, about housing affordability. What does that even mean? What is market rate versus government subsidized? And there's a lot of challenges, but I think before we can start to figure out some of the solutions, we should have a better understanding of what we're actually working with. Last year, Council voted in the Housing Action Plan, which was an in-depth study on what Norwood's current housing stock is, and gave some recommendations. So I have reached out to some excitingly Norwood specific, but also regionally industry experts that are going to walk through a presentation on affordable housing and give us a lot of the the parts that I didn't understand before I was on council, some of the things about coding and ranking and all the different acronyms. So I would like to thank David and Ben and Liz. I saw her, the podium's in, there you are, for coming, and they're going to lead us in the presentation. Afterwards, we'll have some time for some discussion. And then if we have time, we'll get through the other items on the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you folks. Thank you so much.
All right, cool. Thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I apologize for the setup. I realize that it's a mark of my age now that I was like, ooh, I got some small things up there and I'm not going to be able to see it, so I've got a couple computers here. So I'm just going to introduce myself, the other folks here, and really what we're trying to do, we've been talking to Susan for a little while just about kind of understanding affordable housing development, and just some of the tools that are available to you guys as City Council. All the tools have pros and cons, so really just kind of walking through what are some of the tools out there, what are some of the pros and the cons, and what is happening kind of regionally is, in the area of affordable housing. So anyway, my name is David Thompson. I'm president of Affordable Housing with the Model Group. Model Group is a regional developer in Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio. We do market rate and affordable housing, but I specifically oversee our affordable housing development. We've done probably about 3,000 units of kind of income-based or rent-restricted housing in the last 20 years or so. But also for 20 years, I've been a Norwood resident, so I'm always interested in what's happening here, so was just been following kind of housing conversation. So we don't have any projects proposed, anything like that. This is just a chance to kind of talk through some of the tools and stuff. Ben Eilerman, and I'll let him introduce himself too when he gets up. He has a background as an architect, also a Norwood resident, and works for Over the Rhine Community Housing, which is a nonprofit organization that does affordable housing in Over the Rhine. And then Liz Bloom, who is with Bloom Community Partners, who was part of putting together the Housing Action Plan, has been at Xavier University, has been at the City of Cincinnati as part of the Housing Our Future initiative that is kind of working countywide to try to address housing stuff. So what we're going to try to do again is just, not tell you what to do, just talk through, hey, here are the tools that can be used when you're talking about affordable housing. Here's the universe of kind of possibilities. So Liz is going to start us off and going to talk through just some of the data, Hamilton County-wide, and then Norwood specific also. And Liz, you can use this.
And I probably want to look at this too, right?
Yes, you will probably want to look at that also.
Okay, thanks. Good evening. Thanks everybody for having us. I appreciate you all taking the time to really dig deep in this topic. And I wanted to start by just talking about how I got involved in looking at and analyzing affordable housing in Hamilton County. I have been working in the community for a long, long time. And what we have always known, the royal we, always, forever, about Cincinnati and Hamilton County is this is an affordable housing market. And so we don't really have these sorts of problems, right? Except something like 10 years ago now, or maybe even 12 years ago now, friends and partners like Over the Rhine Community Housing and Home and Legal Aid and Price Hill Will and on and on and on started saying, we're seeing a lot of stress around people finding housing. And that was puzzling to me. It was like, what? That's not right. Which led us to a lot more research about what was going on. And indeed, it is right. So the reason that we keep having these conversations about housing affordability is because we have a problem in this region. It is not the same problem that San Francisco and Boston and New York and all of those other places have. In those places, it's very hard for middle-income people to find affordable housing. Here, most middle-income people can still find affordable housing. Maybe it isn't in the neighborhood or the community they wish it was anymore, but they can still find decent affordable housing for their households, their families. For very low-income people, that is not the case. And so what I'm going to do just in a minute, a quick minute, is just share a little bit of the information that we've gotten this is at a county level. About a third of households in Hamilton County are cost burdened. I'm going to talk about what that means. If, for any household to create a budget that is comfortable for them, that lets them save and get the things their kids need at school and get medical assistance and get transportation and have housing and all of that sort of stuff, the rule of thumb is one should not spend, anyone, me, my kid, anyone, should not spend more than roughly 30% of their income on their housing. If they do, they struggle to do all the other stuff we all have to do. So when I say affordable housing, what that means to me is housing that I can afford on my income that doesn't cost me more than about 30% of my income. I have lots of 20-somethings now, my 28, 26, 27, and the rule for them is don't spend too much on your first apartment. It's cool, but don't overspend. We all want that. So when we talk about affordable housing, and when I say to you 30% of Hamilton County households are spending over 30% of their income on their housing, that's what I mean. Doesn't matter how much they make, they're spending whatever their income is, they're spending more than 30% of that to find a place to live. And now I'm going to have to look and that's true for both homeowners and renters. And the way that it manifests for homeowners is, I'm having a harder time paying my mortgage, my taxes are going up, I'm on a fixed income. There are plenty of homeowners, I could tell you exactly how many I could look down here. There are plenty, I'm saying plenty. So of the 30% of our 102,000 cost-burdened households, 45% of them are renters and 20% of them are owners. Most of those owners are probably senior households who are living on fixed incomes. And you can see that here. So good you did this. This is a very good thing. Of our cost-burdened households that are under 65, about 73% of cost-burdened households are under 65. That's young that's all kind of families, that's all kind of people, and about 27% of our cost-burdened households are over 65. One of the things that we heard in Norwood when we were doing our planning work for the action plan, that people worry that seniors are having a struggle with maintaining their housing and their affordability in Norwood. The box on the right, on the bottom, so David said we have been working on housing studies in a number of communities, including Norwood. The reason for that work was because actually it was barely pre-COVID, Hamilton County wanted to encourage communities who were interested to think about what affordability might mean to those communities. And they put an ask out to the 49 jurisdictions in Hamilton County to say who would like to think about this a little bit more deeply. The communities that you see here, Silverton, Deer Park, Addiston, Norwood, Cheviot, and since then Gulf Manor and Forest Park have all completed a housing study. We're actually finalizing Forest Park right now. Oh, right, this doesn't do it. I got it. Got it. So there's a geography to where people, so what I've said is those who struggle in Hamilton County the most are people who make less than $25,000 a year. This is where they live. The darkest parts on the map are the places where people who make less than $25,000 live in Hamilton County. They certainly live in the city of Cincinnati, but they don't just live in the city of Cincinnati. They live all over the region. So that just gives you a little sense of where it is we need to address this issue. The other jargon that you hear all the time when we start talking about housing affordability is AMI, 30% of AMI, 50% of AMI. The area median income, which is what AMI stands for, is that number, that income level, where half the people in the county make more than that and half the people make less than that. That's what AMI is. It's the midpoint. And so when you say 30% of AMI, what we're actually saying is that those are households that are making, at this point, less than about $18,000 a year, which is more than minimum wage. So if you're making 30% of the area median income, you're making roughly $18,000 a year. For you to find affordable housing, you shouldn't be spending more than about $450 a month on your apartment or your house. Let that sink in for a minute. Who has found a rental of any sort, of any kind, with a door that closes and windows that lock for less than $400 a month? It's very difficult to find. Those are the folks who are having the most trouble. And they're working, because now we know that only 3% of our population isn't working. They're working, but they're not making a lot of money. If you make 50% of AMI, you're making roughly $30,000 a year. You shouldn't be spending more than about $740 a month on your housing. Also hard to find. If you make 80% of AMI, you are making about $47,000 a year. So about $1,100 a month for your housing expenses. That's hard to find. The new housing that's at Norwood, Factory 52, is way above those numbers. So this just gives you an indication of what it is to say, what's affordable housing to me? To me, affordable housing is what I can afford at 30% of my income. If my income is minimum wage, I'm going to have a hard time. So about $60,000, 100% of AMI, that's like AMI. Half the people make more, half the people make less. So that just, I hope, sets a little bit of a context for you in terms of, this is very productive, David, in terms of, setting the stage and setting the context. When we did the affordable housing study, or the housing action plan in Norwood, we did Norwood numbers. You have a population of about 19,000 people. It's getting more diverse. You've lost a little bit of population between 2000 and 2010 and stabilized and went up after that. You have a growing single-person household. You have growing single-person household numbers. And you have a younger household, a group of households than you used to. New people are moving into the community. There are almost 3,000 households in Norwood, your residents and neighbors, who are cost burdened right now. Something like 3,000 households in Norwood who are spending more than 30% of their income on their housing. And 23% of them are homeowners. So these are, they're not all seniors, but mostly seniors who are living on fixed incomes, who are people who are starting to struggle, who are having concerns, and who are having a harder time staying in their housing. So I haven't defined this yet. 1,400 households in Norwood are severely cost burdened. What that means is they're spending more than half their income on their housing, which means everything else just gets a lot more difficult. These are households that we would maybe call housing unstable. They're going to be, maybe they're going to get evicted, maybe they're going to lose their mortgage. When you're spending more than 50% of your income on your housing, it's tough. So this was my job tonight, to just set the context for you. I'm going to do one more thing before I let David come back, which is to say to you, when I was last here, I talked about the Norwood Action Plan. I wanted to share with you just a little bit of context. As I said, we've done 8 of these now. What other communities are finding, what other communities are thinking about. The things that many people agree on is that they want to support their community business districts. Everybody wants to support downtown. And people are beginning to think about how density helps them do that. More people close to downtown means more people getting coffee, more people having lunch, all of those things. Everybody, Norwood included, is really interested in protecting senior homeowners. And that's getting increasingly difficult in a lot of communities. The price appreciation of single-family homes in Norwood was one of the fastest among all of the communities that we worked in, but in all of these communities, in Deer Park, in Silverton, a 2-bedroom house with a detached garage in Silverton is over $250,000 now, which is stunning if you think about it for a minute. There's a focus on revitalizing existing housing stock. This is not fours in Norwood, but it's fours, I think, in Gulf Manor. They're the same all over the place. What we used to think of as obsolete housing now starts to feel like good existing housing if it can be properly maintained. And it's fair to expect owners to maintain property appropriately. We're also spending a lot of time on property maintenance standards. How do we take care of existing housing stock? The other thing, and I say this a lot, we want to make sure that there's housing available for the next generation of homeowners. Who are they? What kind of housing do they need? They're increasingly single people households. It's true for you. It's true in all kinds of places in the community. I'm also talking about something called proactive zoning. If you know you want density adjacent to Montgomery Road corridor or I can talk about adjacent to Harrison, adjacent to Hamilton, adjacent to Madison, rather than sort of do that piecemeal, you all have the ability to do that proactively if you want to, as do other communities. Reuse of obsolete real estate, you guys get to be the star right now because the Quality Inn has finally been sold and will be a new use, and that is a very good thing. Finally, code enforcement and home repair. Code enforcement can feel like a real punishment to homeowners, especially homeowners who are already struggling with budgets. Code enforcement is important. I just said it. It's important to make sure property owners are taking care of their property. That's how you maintain stable housing in neighborhoods that are built out. But if you're going to do code enforcement, it's good to have home repair programs available so that not just seniors, I keep talking about seniors, but so any household who is your neighbor, who owns a home, who needs to make improvements, has some resources if they need them. And that's probably enough. But what I was saying to you here, many of those things were true in your housing action plan, but we've talked about them all over the county. There you go.
All right. Thank you, Liz. Okay, so my job is, we want to walk you through the math of why it's really hard to maintain and build affordable housing. I'm the son of an accountant, so I like math, and I think, actually, Ben's boss always says, like, affordable housing has a math problem. Like, there's moral aspects to it, there's, community planning aspects, but at its core, the math has to work in order to supply housing at certain income levels. So why is that? Well, first of all, because housing in this country is a market-based activity, so it's subject to market forces. The demand right now, there are more people that want to move into Norwood than there is housing stock. And I would say that's a good thing, because what's the alternative? The alternative that people do not want to move into Norwood, that's not a good alternative. So demand is greater than supply right now. If you are a landlord, your rents have to cover your expenses, and then the extra is what is going to support the loans on your project. And if you're trying to build something or renovate something, your sources of funds, which often is loans and investor equity, has to cover all of your uses of funds. So just if we can think for the next kind of 10 minutes about housing as a math problem. All right, so kind of a little thought experiment that I like to do to just illustrate how hard this is that what if somebody gave me an apartment for free and said, David, like, I'm giving you this apartment for free, I want you to run it as affordable housing and only charge people $300 a month. I would give it back, because I would say, I can't do that. Like, the numbers won't let me do that. So to illustrate this, and again, we're gonna do some math, and I don't want to get caught up in like, well, wait a minute, this exact number, and I think you could get a better loan rate or whatever. This is supposed to just illustrate principles. But so OFA is the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. They oversee much of the affordable housing production in the state of Ohio, thousands and thousands of units. They do an operating database where they say, hey, we gave you money, how much did it cost to run your apartments? And the data that I have here says statewide, the annual expenses for statewide, then I have it for urban areas, then I have it specifically for Hamilton County. And the long and the short of it is in Hamilton County, this cost database in 2021 said it costs about $594 per month in expenses for a unit of affordable housing. Okay? So about $600 a month was just the expenses. That's your real estate taxes, your insurance, your maintenance, you know, all of your repairs. This is not including big capital things like, hey, I got to replace my roof. This is just to kind of run it. And again, you might say, hey, I own a two-family and I go over and I unplug the toilet and I don't charge anything. You might be able to run it for less, but this is kind of professionally managed affordable housing. All right, so on the right there, I say, okay, well, let's say that I charge $750 for my rent, and the operating expenses are $594. That only leaves $156 a month in cash flow. That's what I have to use to try to pay for a loan, or my roof goes out and I need to take a loan to do that. So $750 a month is what Liz was saying. At 50% of area median income, that's about what somebody who makes about $30,000 a year should be paying. And I can barely do it if somebody gives me a unit of housing, okay? So this was very small font, but I just went on the MLS and I said, multifamily buildings in Norwood. There are 9 for sale right now. The biggest is 23 units. It's $1.6 million. Then there's a 6-family, a couple 4-families, 3s, 2s. The price ranges from $1.6 million down to $141,000. There's one that's $164,000, and those are both sold as is, no repairs. So I'm guessing they're going to need some money put into them. Okay? I told you I like math, and this is the most mathy slide, so don't be too scared here. So what I did is I said, okay, if I have a 2-family, a 4-family, a 6, and a 23-unit building, if I have my rents at $750, and I have those operating expenses I talked about before, what's the maximum loan I can afford if I have a loan at 7% for 30 years, which is real typical terms. And again, maybe you know a banker and you can get a little better, maybe not. So just using that math, it says the maximum loan that I can get on that 2-family is $46,500. On the 4-family is about $93,000. On the 6-family is about $140,000. So you can see that I can't afford to buy any of those if I'm charging $750 in rent and if those expenses are accurate. Okay? So I have a math problem, right? Because most people aren't out just, buying with cash, and even if they're buying with cash, they're looking for a return on their money. Most people are out trying, taking a loan, and if somebody is building a project, they're taking a loan. So they have to have enough money to pay that back. So how do you solve this math problem? There's only a couple ways to do it. One is you increase the rents, right? Because I need more cash to come out the back end so I can afford a loan. The other way I can do it is I can decrease my operating expenses. And again, maybe you can say, hey, $594 a month, I can do it way cheaper. I'll do everything myself. I won't fix as many things. And you start running into issues because nobody wants to live next to something that the landlord isn't investing in, isn't professionally managing, because you want it to be an asset to the community. So you want to be careful about saying I can cut expenses too much. Some expenses you don't control. I don't control what my real estate taxes are. I don't control what my insurance is. Utilities, water and sewer, if that rate goes up, that's not something that I can offset unless I'm raising rents. Or if you could find a way to get other money besides loans, right? So I can afford, a 10-unit building if I don't have to borrow as much money, if I can find other money out there. And so that is one of the things now we're gonna have Ben come up to talk about how you can change that math equation so that you're taking less loans, so hopefully you can charge a little less in rent.
Thank you. I appreciate that I get to come up to you all after David and Liz have laid out a grim picture and talk about how we can balance this math equation. And so the way that we have termed this is non-market-based solutions. And so what we mean by that is that these aren't solutions that are just available kind of every day. You don't go down to your local bank and get these solutions, but they are solutions that are available. And so I'll go into some more detail on each of these, but I wanted to kind of give a broad overview first. So one way that we can do it is with philanthropic dollars, grants, forgivable loans, and other kind of soft debt. So debt that doesn't require, it doesn't have terms that absolutely require repayment. There's some ways that you can pay less when you have less money, pay more when you have more money. Then there are federal and state government programs. So those include the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, the New Market Tax Credits, Federal Historic Tax Credits, Federal Home Loan Bank, and Opportunity Zones. So those may or may not be terms that you've heard of, but those are all tools that are really coming from the federal government and being administered by the states. And then more locally, where we here in Norwood and Hamilton County really have ability to form and shape dollars are through home funds, which are from the feds to the state, but we have more control over them here locally. Mr. Skelly just sent out an email about Hamilton County looking for some input on how the county distributes some of those home funds. Property tax abatement. So here in Norwood, we've got both a residential and a commercial property tax abatement program. TIF dollars, where we set up zones where any improvements that go into those zones can be filtered back into projects. And then also we're increasingly seeing municipalities go ahead and put in general funds dollars. Seeing that especially as municipalities may have extra ARPA dollars that they've got. So on the slide here is 1801 Mills Avenue at the corner of Mills and Carter Avenue. So this is a project that I've worked on with Lydia's house. And so this is a good example of a project that utilized philanthropic dollars. And so, so that made things easier. It didn't make things easy. It made things easier. And I think it's a good illustration of how philanthropic dollars can be used, But in order to really grab hold of them, you need institutions and nonprofits, community-based development corporations that are in our communities established, who donors feel comfortable giving dollars to, and that they know that those dollars will be put to good use. So the federal and state government programs can do a lot more. They're typically the largest source of funds that we've got on the affordable housing projects that David and I work on. Those are capital A, capital H affordable housing projects. We are most typically utilizing the low-income housing tax credit as a major source of our funding. And then even those aren't enough, so we're often pairing them with other funds. But those funds are very competitive, and they're very regulated as well. And so many times those funds can require up to 30 years of commitment to provide those lower rents. And as owners, that's something that can be a scary commitment to make, to have to kind of look into the crystal ball and say, in 30 years, am I still going to be able to do this? And because of all these factors, these funds typically result in kind of a per unit basis that the units are the most expensive to develop. On the more local programs, we've got, again, the home funds, TIF funds, general dollar funds, property tax abatements. So these are generally less complex. And what that means, kind of boots on the ground, is that there's more opportunity for folks to use it. Right across the street from 1801 Mills is 4502 Carter Avenue, another Lydia's House project that I worked on. And this building was able to bring in about $300,000 of home dollars. And so that represented about a quarter of the development cost of the property. But those were key dollars to come in. And those dollars came into Lydia's House when the organization was really kind of getting its feet wet on providing permanent housing. And so a program like HOME, when paired with a jurisdiction that wants to invest those dollars in affordable housing, can provide more opportunity. But again, with this being limited funding, and even more so typically than the federal and state programs, it means that you have to put it together with other funds. So just like I said, this building represented about, the home funds represented about 25% of the development cost. And so those three solutions are really looking at kind of how we solve the math equation on the building side, how we bring more units online, either through acquisition of units, by bringing in these capital dollars, or that we renovate existing units. So there's another piece of it, like David said, is that how can we look at it from the other side? How can we bring in enough money on the operating side so we can support debt? And on the operating side, and even on really on the building side, you know, we talk about building affordable housing, we talk about running affordable housing, but I think what you'll find is that the base costs are the same as market rate housing. And so that's where we need to kind of plug in these other options. And so options on the operating side are things like housing choice vouchers, often referred to as Section 8. And so those can either be on the entire property, so that way a property owner knows they're going to get enough income, they can take that commitment to the bank and get a loan, or can come with the tenant. And so that in theory allows a tenant to go to a market rate landlord and rent from them. And so you're not having someone with a housing choice voucher necessarily having to go to that capital A affordable housing. The other side is operating subsidies. And so kind of pulling away the dollars that support operating support debt from a specific rent, from a specific unit. I have typically seen these come when the project is supporting a specific population. Folks with mental illness, folks who are formerly homeless, folks with disabilities, seniors. So it's a limited kind of set of money that's available and a limited population that you can typically get operating subsidies for. The other side is from a top-down aspect of something that cities and governments can do. And that is to say that we're going to require rents to be lower, right? So in exchange for something like increased density in zoning, in exchange for tax abatement, you can tie in rent restrictions and income restrictions tied into that. But what's important to remember with that is that the math equation is still at play here, right? And so if you offer someone a tax abatement that is worth $1,000 a year on a 4-unit apartment building, and you say you can only charge rents that are 30% AMI, I, like David, am going to say, no, thank you. Like, you can keep your tax abatement and do what you wish with it. I'll offer suggestions after the meeting. And I'll just charge market rents because there's no way that I can make that math equation work. And so there are solutions here, right? And so why can't we just use those solutions in order to solve this problem? I've got on here a picture of 4502 Carter Avenue. That's actually after a lot of cleanup. But these buildings are really hard, especially these historic buildings are really hard to develop. And all of these sources are limited. And like I've mentioned, the regulations that come along with a lot of these funds can often mean that it costs more to develop. So things like prevailing wage, construction reporting, ongoing reporting of tenants' incomes, all individual by themselves have merit, but they also add cost and layers of burden onto projects that are already trying to serve a lot of times the most vulnerable in our community. And additionally, I think that affordable housing projects face additional scrutiny. We are often coming before bodies like yours, before communities, because we are asking for these public resources. And so it often feels like we are put under the microscope with our projects, and it doesn't always feel like that same level of scrutiny is placed under market rate projects. And so that is a very real burden that these projects carry with them. And it's something that if a developer, if a individual property owner has a choice, that's something that they have to weigh. And then I've already kind of touched on operating and complying with these subsidies requires trained professionals. This is, there are layers of codes from the IRS. A lot of these are tax credit programs, and so IRS regulations that have to be complied, or you risk those tens of millions of dollars that you've already spent being pulled back. And so I would say that these tools alone that I've described are not enough to solve the problem. But luckily, David's going to come back and talk about some other options here.
All right, thank you. We got like 10 more minutes and then we'll stop and have Q&A. Again, I think the best analogy here is of a toolbox that really, like, what does a healthy, thriving neighborhood look like? And what are the tools that we can use to make sure that we have a variety of housing for a variety of types of people at a variety of stages of their life, right? So these are all just kind of different tools. So Ben was talking about some, and we said non-market-based tools because, you know, going out and getting grant funds is great, but it is limited. That's not a strategy that we can apply for kind of all of Norwood. Getting operating subsidy for a certain project might be an amazing way to do it. That's not going to cover, you know, all the housing that we want in Hamilton County and in Norwood, et cetera. So we want to talk about some market-based tools too. And so again, I'm the guy with the graphs and the numbers here. You gotta think about supply and demand. And supply and demand, really, the best way to think about it is a Taylor Swift concert.
Oh, no.
Okay? My daughter wanted to go see Taylor Swift. So did a million other people. And there was a limited number of tickets, right? There was very high demand. The supply was low. So what happens to ticket prices? They go way, way up. If she had 100 shows in the Cincinnati area and the same number of people wanted to go, what would happen to ticket prices? They would go down. So that's the idea of a supply and demand curve. So if 100 people want to move into Norwood and there's only 50 vacant units, prices are going to go up. If you flip that and we say there's 50 people that want to move into Norwood and there's 100 available homes, they're going to have a lot of choice and the prices are not going to be able to go up as much, right? So increasing supply is not the only, but is one of the things that can help take some of the pressure off of prices. So again, I think we want there to be strong demand in Norwood. That means that people who have choices are choosing to make Norwood their home. And why not? Norwood's a great place. It's got a lot going for it. So that's something, you know, we want to have good schools. We want to have cool businesses. We want to have high quality of life, all those things. So this is a problem that we're going to have to deal with is, as a landlocked city without a lot of vacant land, is there anything that we can do about the housing supply? Okay, so what are some of the things you can do to increase supply? Number one is zoning code. Zoning code is basically the idea that we get to decide how we're going to use our land. And if, for instance, we say, in order to build a house in Norwood, you have to have 1 acre of land, and you have to have, 100 feet on each side of the house you want to build. We're going to get a certain type of housing stock, right? If we say, you can only build single-family homes. If you say we can only build high-rises, you're going to get a certain development pattern. And so just thinking through what is appropriate zoning for Norwood, which honestly is different than maybe what is appropriate zoning in Adams County, right? So thinking through appropriate zoning is one of the ways that we can increase supply. Another way is make it, I'm going to say, easier to build. Ben was an architect. He's done development. He's done a lot of renovation too. Some places, some communities that we work in are really hard to know what the process is. How long is it going to take for me to get a permit? Is the plan reviewer going to come back with a lot of different things? So having a high quality building department having some kind of stability and consistency is another way that folks who would like to build have some ability to say, yes, I'm going to choose to build in Norwood. We like to talk about gentle and appropriate density. Nobody is talking about trying to make, high-rise apartments on Victory Park. Gentle and appropriate density, which I think if you look at Norwood, Norwood has always had this legacy of some gentle, appropriate density. There's lots of 2 families, there's 4 families, there's a diversity of housing stock that I think has just kind of been part of our legacy from having the GM plant, from having a lot of folks that are walking to work. And one of the things I love about Norwood is it's often right next to each other. My first house is on Mills Avenue, and it would be, 2,500 square foot house next to a 1,000 square foot house next to a 4-family, next to a 10-unit building. There's a lot of variety there and gentle density. So, maybe along Montgomery Road, is that a place that you can have a little more density that may not be as appropriate in the presidential district? I don't know. But just finding places where it makes sense, because density does bring other good things. As Liz said, if you want to have local shops, if you want to keep a grocery store, you need rooftops. So are there places that you can look to have kind of the right kind of density? And this is a place where I say, I said I wouldn't be making recommendations, but Norwood is not going to out-suburb the suburbs, right? So trying to say every house has to have an acre lot and has to have this and whatever, that's not the form that we were built in. And I think that that's a good thing. So what we are trying to do, wrong slide. The other reason, I promised no more of these lots of number slides, but what this slide is showing is that if you use the same land, and you can look at the numbers, but it just makes sense. If you use the same land and you say, I'm going to build a 3,000 square foot house, versus if you use the same land and you build more square footage, but you build a 4-family. There is going to be naturally that single-family house, that 3,000 square foot single-family house is going to cost more, is going to be a larger barrier to entry, and is also only going to attract certain types of folks, even certain family sizes. One of the things that I have various friends of mine in Norwood are ready to downsize and can't find places to downsize to, right? Because they're going from 2,800 square foot home to, hey, I'd like 1,200 square feet. And so just having that variety of housing types, I think, is something that we want to protect and we want to encourage. The last thing that I'll say here, and these are kind of non-housing related tools, another way to help people afford more housing is to have good jobs, to work to increase wages regionally, but Norwood too. I can afford more house if I'm at $40,000 a year than I can if I'm at $30,000 a year. So as a council, you may be working on job stuff, but that's part of your affordable housing strategy. The other thing that I love, and I think this is a place that Norwood can shine, is are there ways to decrease transportation costs? Because people's largest, if you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the largest expense for any family is their home. It's around 30%. The second largest expense for any household is transportation costs, around 15%. If we can be a place where you don't need to have 2 cars and drive an hour to work and deal with all the repairs and all of that kind of stuff. If we have trips that you can make walking, which in Norwood you can, if you can work on bike infrastructure, if we encourage bus routes, if there are other ways to do things, if I only have to spend 10% of my income on transportation, I can afford for more of it to go to housing. So there's actually there's a transportation cost index, a housing and transportation cost index that is working on this thing of measuring, where in the country are neighborhoods that you can live and actually, have transportation for less. Because again, Adams County might have a lot less expensive housing, but I've got to commute an hour every day in order to get there. So it doesn't do me a lot of good. Okay. So in your toolbox, and I think one of the things is you guys on city council is that some of these you have more control over than others. Some of them, and Susan, you said at the beginning, like low-income housing tax credits, there is a score, and the state comes up with a scoring mechanism, and sometimes there's nothing you can do to improve your score, and you just have to wait and see if next year you have better luck. So there's not a lot that you can do if you came out here and said, let's go get low-income housing tax credits. But there's things that you can do around zoning. There's things that you can do around pedestrian infrastructure. There's things you can do around tax abatement policy. And those are some of the tools that you guys control. And I would encourage you, I think, that also you can try to make Norwood just the overall environment one that is working towards this larger strategy of how do we think about housing and affordability. So with that, we've gone on for a long time. We will stop and see if you guys have questions for kind of any of us. And I don't know if there's questions from you guys back here.
Thank you. I'm wondering could you say a few more words about scoring? I don't know if the people watching from home know what that means.
Yeah, you want to take that?
Sure. So the low-income housing tax credit program, like I said, is a very competitive program. And so the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, OFA, tries to create a rubric to decide who gets that funding. Recently, OFA has moved to quantify who gets tax credits, who gets points towards a score that gets the highest score. They've framed that around very measurable kind of physical characteristics of a location. And so those include things like access to grocery stores, pharmacy, access to transportation, things like is the place you're looking to develop in, is it a place that there's lots of development going on in? Maybe that there's a lot of development that is targeted at the higher reaches of kind of the income spectrum. And so they may say, all right, well, there's a lot going on for the high end here. We want to give more points to the lower end here, so to kind of balance out those markets. So that is a process that they kind of recreate every 2 years, where they decide how they're going to score these things. We are at the end of a 2-year cycle. Applications for 2023 were submitted last Thursday, and OFA is going to begin their input sessions on how they should write the requirements and scoring for the next 2 years here shortly.
So can you give a sense of, because I remember we had it pulled up, maybe it was you and I, or maybe it was David, no, I don't remember. We actually had the map pulled up with the locations and the scoring. And there were very few locations in Norwood that met the criteria, even though, as you say that, close to a grocery store, close to, Montgomery Road is a huge metro route. So even with those things, we did not score. There weren't many places that scored high enough that it would look like it would be worth going after those tax credits. Is that accurate? Yeah,
that is accurate. And part of, I want to put some context around too, like going after the tax credit, submitting an application. So that is a very time-intensive process, and it's also a very costly process. I work for a nonprofit organization where we are, we're certainly trying to use rents and other things to pay the salaries of our staff, but we're also counting on a large portion of philanthropic dollars. So every dollar that we spend is really valuable. And it can cost around, $100,000 to put together an application to submit. And so there really needs to be some confidence that you've got a chance at winning these tax credits, because otherwise these reports, market studies, environmental studies, appraisals, all those things expire, right? They're good for a limited period of time. They're a point in time look at the market. So that's important. I would say what you all as council can do, and especially working with staff, is to be engaged in this process, and to start to advocate for cities like Norwood. In the most recent QAP, we did see some movement from OFA. So where OFA started to look at kind of this more just outside of the city centers and start to include that. Previously, it was really kind of urban centers and then rural. And so it didn't kind of capture the space we're in.
Thank you. Do either of you two have questions?
It's a lot to take in.
Do you want to come up to the mic so everyone can hear you from home? Or just a
Yeah, you'll like it. Seriously. Recently, some of the most exciting projects in our region have paired historic tax credits and some of the things he's talking about. That's how they did Lower Price Hill, if I'm not mistaken. Don't want to speak out of my league here. And so recently, the state came down on the ability to do that and said, thou shalt not do projects that use both. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Which I think a lot of people found was very alarming, because all of a sudden buildings that would previously just get mowed down had the ability to be restored and made useful. And so I was wondering if you had projected a timeline, if that was going to be resolved or not. That was my question.
Thank you, Dan.
So, this is certainly an issue that we have been looking at and watching in the industry, part of House Bill 45. And so that said that you can no longer pair the state historic tax credits, very specifically state, not the federal, tax credits with the low-income housing tax credit program. The state historic tax credits are also a limited resource and also very competitive. We are fortunate to still be able to use the federal historic tax credits, which are not competitive. So as long as you follow the guidelines of the historic guidelines, then you're eligible for those. We have been promised from the governor's mouth that, and has shown up in his most recent budget, the creation of a state low-income housing tax credit program. And there's potential that dollars in there would exceed the amount of dollars that are in the state historic tax credit. And so I hold on to every dollar that we have available for affordable housing with an iron grip. And I hate to give that up. But I will say that if we are able to, if the House and the Senate are able to pass a state low-income housing tax credit, I think that we would be in a better place. But I want to be clear, I still would like to be able to use the state historic tax credits, and I think it's asinine that they're trying to decouple it from low-income housing tax credits.
For the record.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? No? I'd like to invite Mr. Skelly if you had some thoughts or opinions that you'd like to share.
I didn't really prepare anything for tonight. I just wanted to listen for what was being presented. But as you know, the council did approve the housing action plan back in March of last year. So within that document, and this is quite familiar, you had 6 major goals, and then within that you had fairly robust objectives. So I think in terms of there's a lot of good information we received tonight, but to me, whether as the development director or as a planner, you just need to kind of now implement in terms of what's a priority for the city, what do you have the resources, what do you have the timing, what makes sense, what's the best fit, and whether you attack the big issues or you proceed on the low-lying fruit, that's entirely up to the political leaders. But you have the information, you have the documents, you have a lot of wherewithal. It's just making a commitment to what makes sense for the city.
Thank you. Something else I'd like to get some thoughts on. I really appreciated your use of the word gentle density. I've heard some people talk about, comparing Norwood's density to other locations, and I think it's appropriate for us to acknowledge that sometimes it's almost street by street about what can take density and what can't take density. Something else that I've always loved about Norwood is my street sounds very much like yours. There's lots of single-family homes. We have a 2-family, we have a 3-apartment unit, and we have college housing, all on the same street, next door to each other. And so when we talk about having that diversity of stock, that's kind of what I think of. That certainly can't work on every single street. But when we're talking about density, how can we have a conversation where we acknowledge that what might work for, say, the presidential district might not work for parts of Ward 4 that is already more compactly populated? Are there other cities, communities that have a better way of sort of zeroing in, or is it just sort of as you go, you pay attention to those things?
Well, I'll start, and then Liz, I'm interested if she's working in lots of different communities. But I think something that I find helpful is begin with the end in mind and say, like, what does a healthy, thriving Norwood look like? And I think often we would say, hey, a healthy, thriving Norwood has a variety of housing types, again, for a variety of types of people who are in a variety of stages of life. Because Norwood we've got students, we've got large families. My house on Mills evidently had 11 people in it at one time. And also has people that want to get rid of their house that had 11 people in it at one time, but would like to stay in Norwood. And, my mother-in-law is looking for a place that has no steps, right? And so I think if we say, well, that's our goal, then I think we can look at the built environment and say there are places, there are some streets that lend themselves, and we're not inventing this from scratch. So I think, there are some places that are very single-family focused. There are other places that have these great little 4 families and stuff that do not feel like this big thing that is, towering. And then there are development sites that what is appropriate is a big towering thing. So I think just, I'm kind of the party of housing is a good thing and a variety of housing is a good thing. So it's mostly about, and that's things that planners can often help us with is, all right, what kind of zoning? And then the one thing I will say is just, if there is some flexibility in zoning, there are places that are saying, hey, you can still build single family, but that's not the only thing that you can build here. You could also build a duplex. You could, so giving some flexibility there for where it's appropriate. Liz, I don't know if you want to add what you're seeing other places.
Thanks. I'm just going to take 2 seconds. So I think that zoning, there's two pieces to a zoning code. One is the code, the regulations, the text that says this much square footage of real estate for this much house. The other is the map. And so when you say things like, you know, in some places it's appropriate, in some places it's not, those are map decisions. So have a conversation as a community, and I'm going to use it and say it would be typical, and it is typical in other communities in the county, to say we would really like to, if we're going to have more density, we're comfortable with that along main corridors. Because that does a lot of things. It's on the bus route, it's close to stores, it's close to schools, it's close to all the things we want people to walk to, so we're comfortable with more density there. So you can map it. In the Presidents, we're probably not so much. So, single family in the Presidents. And then there's all kinds of iterations in between, right? So I think it's about talking with neighbors, figuring out where it's appropriate means on the map and mapping it, so.
Thank you. We're pretty informal here, Dana.
Okay, you got the softball, now you're going to get my concerns.
All right.
Okay? Objections, right? They're supposed to be your opportunity to sell your project. So, my big concern, we keep talking about the housing plan. We were told that the housing plan, you know, was going to be somewhat flexible, that it wasn't like written in stone. And my big concern is that when we got down to the nitty-gritty in the ADU presentation, we discovered that very few people were interviewed specifically. We're hearing a lot of statistics about our housing insecure, that those housing insecure people, we didn't really do a lot of community engagement. We didn't really get their narrative or their stories or what was their big crisis moment, or how has this been a cascade down to less housing. So I am asking council to, while all these things are wonderful, I really feel that you need to do some town halls and do a deep dive. People elected you, they trust you. And we need to have, maybe they don't want to speak in public. Maybe they want to speak to you door to door. But I really feel like more engagement and listening needs to happen, because while we have a lot of data and facts, the compass is tied to the people. And the people need to be respected. I want to say to Lydia's House credit that Lydia's House is amazing, and everybody trusts the commitment and the citizenship of Lydia's House. Nobody doubts that, ever. Same with Over the Rhine Community Housing. They have wraparound services, they have summer camps, they have art camps, they have stuff for kids, they have stuff for people trying to hang on to their sobriety and people who aren't trying to hang on to their sobriety. They take care of the whole person. They have people who are working and people who are not working. So they have a very, very holistic approach. Same thing with Tender Mercies. Very compassionate to people. They're on Social Security. They help people get Social Security. Usually there's mental illness treatable. They are taking care of this specific sector that has chronically experienced homelessness. So you have Tender Mercies, Over the Rhine Community Housing, Lydia's House, and they are a completely different animal than Carpenter Flats. I'm sorry, I think Carpenter Flats is a warehouse for people, and it's totally disrespectful. It's clean, it's tall, it looks nice, but my understanding is nobody from Norwood lives there. It didn't treat our housing problem. The other thing I really don't like about Carpenter Flats is it's surrounded by pavement. If you think about people who age in place in Norwood, they have porches, they have their tomato plants out back. They gossip about their neighbors. Well, people at Carpenter Flats, senior housing, they don't have any of that. And there's a ton of room for raised box garden. There's no gazebo for them to go and sit and have a smoke or something. I mean, whatever, live your life, you know? It's not our job to tell them how to live, but that programming of that building is so restrictive, it doesn't resemble Norwood life. So my concern is I don't want to see another Carpenter Flats. I feel like it's not sensitive to Norwood. And so I'm asking council and this committee to make sure that the solutions are intimate and responsive to our people. Okay?
Thank you.
And I hope everybody can hear that without, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments, questions, concerns?
I have a question. Would love to get your guys' input. I know in the Housing Action Plan, the CRA tax credit, how Norwood utilizes it was kind of mentioned, looking into that. And I know City of Cincinnati just kind of redid their residential to a tax or tiered system. Wondering your thoughts on if Norwood has the capacity to utilize that to maintain our current 2 to 3 family affordable housing, or if we could also use it on the end of helping people to maintain their housing that if they're having a difficult time doing that. Just thoughts, or if you've seen it work elsewhere, some cities.
Yeah, I guess we'll do a tag team here.
Yeah.
So I'll go first. So it's a very opportune time for that with regards to the CRAs. And I say so in one of these things where the legislation recently changed. Senate Bill 33 provided some fairly major tweaks to that tax abatement policy. So the city, law department, Alloy, ourselves, and we've noticed, you know, past couple of years in terms of how we originally wrote that document back in 2009. So staff, law department, Alloy will all be looking at that, and it probably makes sense to have some guidance also from the politicians as to what makes sense, because we know in the last year, several months, you've been observing what's happening in Cincinnati. You talk about it, where you have a very scalable allocation of abatements being made. And again, it all comes down to what's your priority, what are the policies, where do you want to put, you know, necessarily the A's, in this case we're talking about people. Is residential still a priority? What sort of priority? Commercial, what do we have? There's been discussions when we've had major developments come through. And we talked earlier today about density bonuses, inclusionary zoning. So all those things can be baked into policy. So,
I agree with what Mike is saying. I mean, tax abatements that are given at a local level ought to reflect local objectives. I can speak to the city of Cincinnati and actually Norwood. I mean, the intent early on was we need to attract more housing investment of any type, so everybody got an abatement anywhere. And it was intended so that you would attract more housing investment. And in Cincinnati it was successful, and in Norwood it was successful. I think what Cincinnati has stepped back and said is, well, okay, when we look at what happened, we now have like 15 years maybe of history on the abatement program in Cincinnati. The abatements actually went to relatively high-income neighborhoods, way over, very little abatement was granted in low-income neighborhoods, and the city said that probably doesn't reflect our objectives anymore. And so the tiered system is designed to be a little bit more nuanced than everybody everywhere. I think Mike is exactly right. You know, it's something you all control, and deciding what the priorities and how you really want to provide incentives, because it means tax dollars not coming to you when you provide the incentives. It's free, but it's not free, right? And that's why the schools are involved in the conversation. So what it is you want to incent in that way is always, the prerogative of the elected body, so.
Ben, you kind of mentioned it earlier, like coming to the city, asking for abatement. Say the city says, we'll give you this much if you don't have rent more than that. I tend to be black and white. I know negotiations are everything but that. But, so like Mike, if a commercial or resident is coming and doing a CRA application, more commercial, right, working with Alloy, is it possible to have that information when they come to the city saying, hey, if we get X amount and we're a 10 unit, we can keep our rental costs at this? Most of the time we hear, I don't know what the rental cost is going to be in 6 months, so I can't tell you what I'm going to charge. Is that something that can happen, or is it just too muddled to even get that information? Just so it's, okay, we know what you want, we know that we can have 6 units that will be affordable housing. Or just, maybe not even affordable housing, but lower rent than, would work.
I'll talk real quick and then if you.
Well, here, let me set you guys up, so. Yeah, so here's the vacuum. So you heard again earlier tonight, analogies about math and accounting. Investors, developers, they love stability. Whether it's Wall Street or whatever, it's certainty. You want mathematical precision. I will spend this much money will come from here from abatements, and this is how much I'll get at the end. So when you can provide that to a developer, and more importantly, when you can communicate that up front, early, so they're not hit at the 11th hour, I think then you have the perfect relationship and the progress. So getting back to your question, absolutely. And even right now, without touching the CRA, under section, I believe, 5F, there's about 13 criteria that are there in terms of listing why we have CRAs. So again, council can play the heavy and say, hey, we want more of this or more of that. We want, again, a lot of things you see, and it's included in ours, LEED. So you want to have very robust environmental design energy standards. That's included already in our policies. So I think it's fair game on all that. It just matters to, like I said, for the benefit of the developer, because ultimately it's their neck, providing that stability and communicating that very early from the get-go. And I think you'll have enough developers then willing to make the math work.
Yeah, so I would say two things. One is absolutely the more, that, like, the tax abatement is just an input into the pro forma. And the more that I know what it is going to be, it's 50%, it's 25%, it's whatever, I can look and see if I can make something work. So knowing what that is, having kind of clear guidelines is really helpful. The one piece I would say that is difficult is if Norwood is like, hey, 4-family, we're going to give tax abatement who's going to monitor that? That's where it's kind of easier if you're piggybacking on, hey, Lydia's house has home funds in it, so the county is already monitoring. But just know that, if you're trying to do it at very small scales, who is, somebody rents and then they leave in a year and somebody new rents, and like, how are you monitoring that? Versus it's a little easier if it's a one-time, if it's a sale of a house or something like that. But just the low-income housing tax credit is a 30-year use restriction. It is a deed restriction in the land. So it's pretty easy to monitor a 4-family that somebody promises, hey, this one I'll charge less. Just think about how's that going.
And I'll say one more thing as a Norwood citizen and a resident, right? Like, if you can define like what developers are getting, that feels a lot better to me, right? I think to your point, Dana, like, if the city has priorities and they're saying, okay, what we prioritize is we prioritize, Mike brought up, environmental efficiencies through the LEAD program. If you can quantify that and communicate it, and that's just known to people, I think that feels a lot better than, David or me or PLK or somebody coming to the city and entering into a negotiation that oftentimes feels like, when we're sitting on this side of the table, as a black box that we're not allowed to know. And so I would encourage you, let's create criteria and let's broadcast those broad and wide.
Thank you. Any other comments, thoughts? No? I want to thank you guys so much for coming in. Yes, to Alexis's point, a lot of information, and I've had several conversations with you guys already, and still more information. This is it's definitely a challenging task that we have in front of us, but I'm feeling slightly more hopeful, especially as I'm seeing what other communities are doing, and we can kind of steal the best ideas and see what would make the most sense here. I think what we need to do, and I wish that Mr. Braden was here tonight, we need to start deciding where we want to have our priorities. I feel like we've, as a city, been more reactive rather than proactive, and that makes sense coming out of, the dark years of GM. I feel like we're still coming out of that time period. So for us to have more of a plan rather than a, grabbing things where we can and, okay, this is the good thing at this moment rather than what really makes the best sense for our community. So I think that this will be really helpful as we move forward and make those decisions. So I want to thank you very much. We do have a few other items on our agenda. You're welcome to stay for. And now I've got to pull up the agenda because I can't remember what they were.
Heating and cooling centers.
Do you have it? Oh, heating and cooling centers during inclement weather. That was another one I was hoping you was here for. And I don't know, Mr. Skelly, if you know, historically, has Norwood ever had heating or cooling centers during inclement weather?
I absolutely have no idea.
Yeah.
But let's see some veterans.
I don't know of any, as if they weren't publicized,
Okay.
which would, be kind of consistent with things.
So as far as I know, we never had. This was something that Mr. Thompson put in this committee at the last council meeting. There are some challenges with that, but I kind of want to see what folks' thoughts were. The couple places that make the most sense if we were to go ahead and do it would be the rec center or the community center. Of course, the problems or challenges would be they'd have to be staffed, and that costs money. We'd have to communicate that out. I feel like the first conversation would be with Mr. Powers and probably the law department, and wanted to see if anyone was interested in following up on that. Or I can put it on my to-do list, but it'll be lower on my to-do list.
I can do it. I've been talking to Ohio Environmental Council, and she had a lot of good data on Norwood, and just we are the highest risk as a heat island for
Awesome.
extreme weather, so I can do that.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you. What was the next thing?
Planning for,
Oh, that's you.
I've reached out to a few organizations and I've spoken. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm slow to get my programs started again, but I've looked at organizations.
Doing homeownership classes for residents, and Alexis has been working on that. There's a lot of waiting for calls back and that kind of thing.
Yes.
But that is something that we're looking at. And I know you'd also done in the fall the program for renters and landlords.
Yes.
And they're going to do that again in the spring?
Yes, that was my plan. I've not reached out to the Xavier student ambassador yet, but I was going to reach out to her because I know she had concerns with Xavier students and lease problems, I'll say. Possible advantage being taken of students. So I was going to try to reach out to students so they could know that they have great resources in the community to negotiate their leases and things like that.
Cool. And then, the 513 relief bus. This is actually super exciting. The 513 relief bus, it's a giant 40-foot long bus that Hamilton County Commissioners purchased. And the goal of it is to take the bus into the community to provide social service access. Every location that the bus is at, you have a different collection of community resources on the bus. It's a very, very long list. Jobs and Family Service, Talbot House, and I'm going to blank on the list of all the other ones. But I've worked with the health department, and they're going to be coming to Norwood on the 23rd of February. They're going to have the bus parked right outside of the health department. And inside the health department, there will be, Talbot House will be doing depression and anxiety screening. We will have Urban League will be doing, do you have the list in front of you?
I do.
Please.
Hamilton County Job and Family Services will be there to help with application assistance for economic relief and public assistance programs. UC Health is doing blood pressure screenings. And then the Council on Aging will have resources for older adults and caregivers. And then the Urban League is doing employment connections and business development for financial literacy.
So that will be all right here, right on Sherman Avenue, on Thursday the 23rd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. You don't need to make an appointment, just show up. When they had their very first bus stop a few weeks ago, I think it was over in Bond Hill, and over 350 people got access to the bus. So it's a really amazing program, so I'm really super excited about that. And then the other thing is, do we have other items that we need to discuss? Any other
Sorry,
housing?
sorry if you said it, for the bus, what avenues are we using to get it out there for everybody? So
Oh.
like if they need info, where do they?
It's on this, I sent it over to Noah. I can't confirm if it's on the city website. It's on the Norwood City Board of Health website.
There's a sign for it at the health department as well.
There's a sign at the health department. I know that Shireen with the health department was going to take flyers into the community, the library, the coffee shops, Kroger, community center, rec center. I'm going to take some and distribute them this week as well at the places that she doesn't. So I'm going to have the city do another email blast, or ask them to do another email blast next week when it's a little closer to it. Yeah. Can you think of anything else?
Would it be, I know it was mentioned, and this might be a question for Mr. Skelly as well. Sorry, I'm kind of going back to the presentation.
That's all right.
But, I mean, we do have TIF districts in Norwood, and it was mentioned that TIF funds could go towards affordable housing. Would it be worth discussing that as a possibility in the future? Well, maybe? I mean, I should have quick
Mr.
Google.
Skelly?
I was saying maybe we should add using TIF funds for affordable housing to the agenda. Do we anticipate, I know we have like, what, 5 TIF districts now?
Correct.
But
That's, in
those
terms of
parameters have already
TIF,
been set.
I know very, very little about, so it's something
Okay.
that we have, bond council, we have people
Right.
that are expert at that. But again, that's being used also for affordable housing in certain jurisdictions.
Right.
Both in Ohio and elsewhere. So I think, again, there's a lot of opportunities, you just have to kind of,
Pick-
how do you want to slice and dice?
Right.
What makes sense?
Okay.
Sorry.
So based on my short reading, I think we'd have to set it for future TIF parameters, because we've already set them for the ones that are established, but I was reading that other large cities have made it a requirement for TIF districts that a certain portion of all TIF districts have to go to affordable housing. So maybe that's something we could, yeah. Do you want to add that possibly to the agenda? Sure. We could even set it seems like we could even do it for future TIF districts. So that way we're not, pulling the rug out from anyone now,
Yeah.
but it would be a future improvement, possibly.
I'm curious how that impacts that, that cost piece again
Right,
for developers.
yeah. Well, it would just be TIF funds that they would have to give to the city anyway. It's just, right, it's just a certain portion of those funds have to
So
go
we
to
could say-
affordable housing.
The city is gonna use X amount of this money.
Yes,
Oh, gotcha.
that we are already getting
Okay,
towards affordable
towards that,
housing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make a note. So shall we, sorry, I can't type.
Maybe we
at
should
the same
talk to
time.
like,
Yeah, who should we talk to about that?
probably the tax department would be my guess, or the auditor possibly. Because it'd be budgeting, and we'd have to figure out how to distribute the dollars. I couldn't remember the word for money for a second.
It's been a long day.
I'm very tired.
It's been a very long day.
I just know that's something we already do.
Yeah.
So it'd be
I think just talking
not
to the
an
right
easy
people on-
fix,
on
but it'd
how to
create a
do-
pool of money.
Right.
It'll just require some,
Something tangible.
yeah.
We'd have to figure out how to distribute it, I think would be.
So we can put that on the agenda for the next meeting as well as,
Just follow up on how we would go about that.
yeah, let's take a look and decide how we want to proceed. She just stepped out of the room. But I'm curious if there's a way we can invite communities' input. I know unfortunately, not a lot of people can come to these meetings. So how can we get feedback from the community about what they might have their priorities as we're making the decisions?
I mean, town halls,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we advertise town halls though, the same way we do these meetings, so I guess
Yeah.
maybe we just have to make the agenda look more exciting.
yeah.
And I think, and unfortunately, town halls tend to sway more homeowner, more higher income, they have more access.
Yeah.
So we need to be aware that that information is going to be slightly slanted.
So, can I?
Yeah, please. You continue to be the expert.
Yeah, I would just offer on community input, like typically we have found the most success by doing lots of things in lots of different ways, right? So town halls are certainly an avenue for that. As you've already said, that brings a certain group of folks. We have, we've utilized local CDCs as we've been working, and so whether that's somebody like Lydia's house, whether that's Norwood Together, utilizing the schools.
How would you utilize the schools? Like, what would that look like?
So you could,
Send
you could
flyers
see if you
home?
could send flyers home, right? You could, if there's events at the school, you could maybe staff those. If it's like input directly, you could put a poster up in Kroger or, so I would just encourage broad and wide on community input, and there are lots of good resources out there for folks who are trying to engage lots of voices and maybe not the typical voices.
Okay, now you get my wheels turning. I'm sort of curious about a survey similar to what Emily did for the parks. Go ahead.
No, like for how we would, for what they think would be solutions to affordable housing, or
Not
for
necessarily
how to,
What their priorities would be.
for affordable housing?
It's a new thought.
Okay. No, I was just double checking. I didn't know what you wanted to survey, I guess was my question.
I think that would be good and.
No.
Compare it to the action plan. I mean, my thought too is like, the survey I like, but getting people on foot that can go door to door and be like, can I ask you these questions, I feel like going out, those are the conversations I had with most people. They're like, oh, I don't do email, I used, and they're always so happy to see you. I know it takes a lot of time, but maybe if we have certain like houses or addresses that we know, like, okay, word of mouth. I know there's a lot of people in the community that kind of already know, specifically, you know, those elderly houses that they might not get out as much. But really like tapping into those community, we have the groups, but there's also individuals in the community that most people know of. Be like, hey, I know you have a network that I might not be able to access. We're trying to do this survey.
Give us QR code to.
Yeah, so
and
coming up with
friends.
a list of those individuals and really, like Ben said, just, you know, trying to put out as many arms into the community as possible.
Okay.
But that would be interesting to get that information and kind of compare it to the
And
housing
have
action
it
plan.
kind of in back and forth inform each other.
Yeah,
I think that'd
yeah.
be really helpful. Okay, so let's figure out when we want to get back together, and we can all bring our housing action plans and, you know, have synthesized some of this information and start figuring, like, start teasing out how can we get some of this information from the residents that we would need.
Okay.
All right, so if we were to look, say, a month out, what works for folks?
Do you want to meet before the 14th council meeting in March?
That would be great. Do you want to meet right before the council meeting, like at like 6 o'clock?
6, that's fine.
Would that be okay?
Works for me.
On the 14th March?
Mhm.
All right.
The Ides of March.
Ah. Okay, and so for the agenda, what else do we need to have on there? You want to have a discussion about future TIF districts? We want to talk about possibly doing some
Warming and
community-wide survey and discussion.
On the warming and cooling centers. Will that be enough time for you to follow up?
Sorry?
For the warming and cooling centers, would that be enough time for you to follow up?
Yeah.
Listen, the months go fast.
Oh, maybe I'll tell you. The days are long, the months are fast.
Okay, I think we're good. Fantastic. All right. If there's not anything else, we will conclude. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.